The Atheist Debates Patreon project presents Defining Religions. So this is probably going to be a relatively short video today, but it addresses a point that I find increasingly important. We've talked before in debates about making sure you define your terms, to try to make sure that you're not talking past each other as much as possible. Is Islam a religion of peace? No. And yes, because Islam isn't one thing, and religions aren't one thing. And even when you drill down to the most discrete level within religions, they're not one thing. They're not something that's easy to define. You can go to a dictionary, which I don't necessarily recommend, but it will list the usages of various words and terms, and it will try to come up with some sort of definition that's useful. But the truth is, I did a debate recently about whether or not is religion a force for good, or does religion contribute to good? Well, of course, religions can and do contribute to good, but they also contribute to harm. So I don't think it's fair to say that on the whole, generally speaking, religions are a force for good. People certainly can be a force for good, irrespective of whether they are inspired or directed by their religion. So how do we go about defining things? You know, recently, Jordan Peterson had pointed out that the Nazis were not atheists, or that they were atheists. And this is predicated, as has been discussed online, on basically a no true Christian fallacy, a no version of the no true Scotsman fallacy. It begins with, atheists wouldn't have morals, atheists would do things like this, and Christians, of course, with his particular model and esoteric definition of Christian, couldn't possibly do the things that the Nazis did, therefore the Nazis weren't true Christians, therefore they were an atheist regime, even if they had Gottman Uns on their belt buckle and things like that. And it gets down to this issue of how do we define what a Christian is? How do we define what religion is? How do we define what a Muslim is? And there's no easy answer. And that's the point that I'm getting at today. You could say, for example, religion X, insert your favorite religion, is whatever its tenets are. Okay, but what are its tenets? What are the things that people ascribe to this? Because we could say that a religion is as its followers does, but there's no uniformity there either. So when we talk about religion, you can define it in such fuzzy ways that being a fan of a sports organization could be a religious sort of thing. The Supreme Court has defined it for legal purposes of anything that addresses ideas of ultimate concern, which I think is a nice way of kind of summarizing it, because certainly you can be religious about anything. I am religiously doing 3 videos a month for the Patreon. That doesn't make it my religion. So you have to consider the broader context and what you're discussing. If you want to say that atheism is a religion, you're in probably the worst possible position to make such a claim, because there's no dogma, there's no tenets, there's no required set of beliefs, there's no organized structure, there's no church hierarchy, there's no prescribed authority. There's virtually nothing about being an atheist that equates to religion, other than we occasionally get together and socialize, but that's who we are as humans. Humans are social creatures. Sometimes we do it on Sundays, especially in the countries where we have Sunday as a primary day of the week off, in part because of adherence to other religions. There were so many religious people, it just makes sense to have Sunday be a general day off, and then it makes sense for non-religious individuals to meet on that day too, because there's going to be more people off. What else is there about it that could make it potentially a religion? Under the definitions that would let atheism in, you would have to let in everything: stamp collecting, any hobby, any sports fan type thing. So instead, when we're talking about religion, we're talking about both organized, structured religions with a church and unorganized religions. There are plenty of deists, of theists of various stripes that aren't part of an organized religion. Matter of fact, they're proud to say, "Oh, I'm against organized religion," which is where you get to this spiritual but not religious sort of language. But there's no easy way to summarize and say religion is this. We can do slight approximations to say, religion is about ultimate concerns, or religion is the package of ideas that people believe, and it involves perhaps worship or adherence to, a particular subscribed philosophical view that may or may not have supernatural origins. But what about when we get down to like a more specific religion? If religions aren't something, but we have subcategories of it, it's at least well defined enough that we know that, Christianity is a religion and playing the banjo isn't a religion, or at least in that context that we're discussing. But we can't sum up Christianity with any one simple collection. So how do we go about doing this? What takes precedent? Is it the professed beliefs of the adherents? Is it the actual beliefs of the adherents? Is it what the adherents do? Is it what the church creed is? Well, now you're getting closer to something that could be defined as this is what this religion believes. Because at the standpoint of each individual, they might have very confused notions about what they believe. There's a reason why you end up with a First Baptist Church and a Second Baptist Church. It's because at one point they were just in the Baptist Church and there were disagreements about certain points of doctrine. And many of these religions will point out that they will agree on essential things and disagree on non-essential things. Doxis over praxis. And this gets a little closer to saying this is what this religion is about. If we have a church creed saying our church believes that God the Father created the universe and his Son Jesus came to die for our sins, these are the things that you would need to believe to properly be considered a part of that church. But that doesn't exist in the way that we would like to, because we'd like to say, oh, Christianity is this, and Islam is this, and Hinduism is this. And yet, and we'll just stick with Christianity for the moment, Christianity is divided into Catholicism and Protestantism, and within each of those there's different groups. There's Orthodox groups, there's Protestant, there's Lutheran, Episcopalian, Methodist, Baptist, etc., etc., etc. Let's just go from theist, that's pretty easy to find. If you believe in a God, you're a theist. Then religious. Okay, if we're talking about theistic religions, then these are the matters of ultimate concern that apply within the structure of a God belief. And then below religion, we would have Christianity, which is, I think the best you could describe it at that top level is a religion pertaining to Jesus Christ, which isn't his last name, by the way. I love the fact that there are people who, plenty of believers don't know that. They just kind of view it as Jesus Christ. That's his name. It's Jesus the Christ. But from that, you can drill down to what different denominations believe. But even, the Southern Baptist Convention is distinct from other Baptists, Free Will Baptists, etc. And the Southern Baptist Convention will have its creed. And so we've gone from I believe in God at the top level, to I am subscribing to some religious notion about that God, to I'm subscribing about the Christian notions about that God, now down to I'm subscribing to the Southern Baptist notions about that God. And then within the Southern Baptist Convention, each church might have its own doctrines, and then each individual might. So what is the true Christianity? What is the true Southern Baptist? Well, what about just saying, these are people who believe the Bible. Now we've got something to hold them to, right? Now we've got something concrete. You just can't have your own completely esoteric view about God and still consider yourself a Bible believer, right? Well, it'd be nice if things were that way, but it's not, because even within the view of people who would believe the Bible, that doesn't mean they're all going to have the same interpretation. That doesn't mean they're going to have the same understanding. Some people are going to highlight these verses over these verses. I remember even when Ray Comfort called into the show and I tried to raise what the Bible has to say about slavery, even Ray just flatly said he doesn't believe everything that's in the Bible. And this caught a lot of people, including me, off guard, because I would have viewed him as somebody who would maybe try a little harder to defend what's in the Bible. Whether or not he was just saying that at the time as a dodge to avoid a sticky situation, I don't know. But we hear a lot about, is Islam a religion of peace? Well, no. No more or no less than probably any other religion if you cherry pick the right verses. But what about Sunni, Shia, Sufi, etc.? Yeah, we're seeing these divisions all over the place. And so here's the thing to get to. You can make the case that if you believe things that are in opposition to what the Bible says, you cannot be considered a Christian. You can make that case. It's going to be very difficult, and basically you're still engaged in a no true Christian fallacy because you are defining what a true Christian is. A true Christian is somebody who believes in the Bible. Well, does that mean they believe literally in Adam and Eve, or is that a metaphor for, how God created humans and humans fell from grace? Was it actually two little literal people and a fruit and a talking serpent? And you don't get to do that. At least not if you hope to have an actual productive discussion. And this is what I've been trying to get to. Rather than saying, this is what Christianity is, this is what Southern Baptist is, this is what this Baptist church is, it's probably better to acknowledge that what we're really doing is speaking about generalities. Generally speaking, Christians accept the Bible. Generally speaking, Christians are people who recognize that Jesus of Nazareth was the Son of God who died for their sins. These kind of baseline essential beliefs. It's far better to actually engage with the person and get them to tell you, here's what I believe and why I believe it. And more importantly, here's what I believe and here's why you should believe it as well. This isn't just, hey, let's define terms. It's let's make sure that we're not misrepresenting what people say. Let's make sure we're not oversimplifying things. Let's make sure we're not painting a Baptist with Catholic doctrine because that's all we know. It's very difficult to put things in boxes. That's what we do. That's what labels are for. And we need to do this cautiously and with the understanding that we're speaking generally, which is why when I say something like, Christians believe that Jesus died for their sins and rose again on the third day to join God in heaven, and that redemption is by grace through faith. Well, not every Christian believes everything about that, and certainly not in the same way. But generally speaking, it's true. And as long as you acknowledge that you're speaking generally, that's fine. But when you're having a conversation with somebody who doesn't accept that, then you have to view things on their terms. You have to argue with them where they're at. You have to have that discussion given their terms. It doesn't do any good. You could be right. I'm happy to point out that that Westboro Baptist Church is often more biblically accurate than the other Christians who want to say that Westboro Baptist Church is terrible. The Westboro Baptist Church is terrible, but that doesn't mean that they are being unbiblical. And it also doesn't mean that even when they're being biblical, that theirs is the one and only accurate translation or interpretation or understanding. So avoiding this oversimplification is key. I try to make sure that I listen charitably. I try to make sure that I'm not painting someone with beliefs that they don't have, which is why we ask questions, which is why in discussions I'm happy to have somebody explain, and I'm happy to be somewhat loose with terminology. If it's clear that the two people, that me and the other person are not using terms in the same way, I will offer the corrections so that they understand what my view is, or perhaps what the normative view is. If you want to say skepticism is cynicism, I'm going to come back. I'm going to go at you on that and say that no, it's actually not the same thing, and here's why. And as a skeptic, and as somebody who can show that I am consistent with modern skeptic views about it not being cynicism, I have a case to be made. But at the end of the day, if you want to just claim that what I'm engaged in is cynicism and not skepticism, now we just need to define what cynicism is, under your view, and have a discussion about whether or not we've made the case. There are limits. It doesn't do us any good to give so much away that black becomes white and left becomes right. We have to have some ability to communicate. And there's two things to look out for. One, is the person you're talking to seemingly playing word games? One thing you'll hear quite often is, oh, well, that's just semantics. Well, hang on. Semantics is about meaning, which is exactly what things should be about. When you're having a discussion about what words mean, that's not trivial. It's essential to making sure that everything else you discuss is accurate. What's really being said here is, oh, this is too frustrating. I wanted to talk about X, and instead we have to talk about the 20 things that lead up to X and whether or not we're using the words the same. Yes, unfortunately, that's the way things are. Because despite the fact that you think you speak a common language, there's going to be differences in understanding. So the end result, the takeaway, try to make sure that you acknowledge when you are speaking generally about a subject, normatively about a subject, and also recognize that there are esoteric distinctions and that each individual may have a completely different view. It is fair to point out that their esoteric views do not become the standard just because they hold those views. There's a difference between a normative usage. If someone were to say, Christianity is actually about slaughtering babies and painting your house pink. Okay, that's a very esoteric view of what Christianity is. It is in no way tied to the norms. And this can be demonstrated. But at the end of the day, they're just hard-heartedly saying, no, this is what Christianity is. Fine. Then let's throw all the labels out. We don't have to call it Christianity. We'll call it your religion. You tell me all about it and why you think it's true and why you're convinced of it and why I should be convinced of it, and we can have that conversation. And as noted in a previous video, if you can't get folks to agree that they actually care about truth, when they probably do, and when you can't get folks to agree on what truth is, any conversations you have about truth other than establishing that initial point of agreement are probably a waste of time, unless you're engaged in some sort of reductio ad absurdum to show them, oh, yes, in fact, they do mean truth the same way you do, and they do care about truth, which is a valid tactic. But I see a lot of oversimplification in trying to define what religions are, what religion is, and the key thing to remember is that it's not one thing. Even First Baptist Church of Cleveland, and as part of the Southern Baptist Convention, is not one thing, because there are many people there. And you could pick two people at random, and they're going to have a lot of views in common, and they're going to have some views that are different. And it's worth pointing out that, because if they think they're sitting in a building with the exact same views as everybody around them, they're almost certainly, and probably demonstrably, wrong. And that's probably more valuable than sitting around arguing about whether or not somebody is or isn't a true Christian, or whether or not Islam is or isn't a motherlode of bad ideas. It is. It's just not the only motherlode of bad ideas. This video is made possible by supporters of the Atheist Debates Patreon project. You can find more information and add your support at patreon.com/atheistdebates.